Inspector Hale had a habit of reading letters twice before deciding whether they deserved belief. The first reading was for words. The second was for whether by which he meant the invisible conditions around them. Hesitation in ink, pressure in phrasing, the faint smell of someone trying too hard to sound ordinary. This particular letter arrived on a Tuesday that had already given up on being memorable. Rain hung in the air without committing to falling. The village post office had done its usual rounds of disappointment in catalogs. Nothing about the morning suggested interruption, until the envelope. It was left on the inspector's desk by Constable Reese, who did not knock so much as announce his presence through the doorframe. "Came addressed personally, sir." Hale did not look up immediately. "Everything that enters this room is addressed personally. It's the nature of the room." Reese placed it down anyway, as if it might warm his hands. No return address. That at last earned attention. The envelope was ordinary in the way a perfectly clean glass is ordinary, technically unremarkable, but slightly wrong in context. Cream paper, firm hand, no smudges, no hesitation. The name on the front was unmistakable. Inspector Hale, not rank and name, not station and department, just him. He turned it over once. The seal had already been broken. Reese noticed. Post office said it arrived sealed. Properly, I mean. Post offices say many things, Hale replied. He opened it without hurry. Inside was a single sheet. No greeting. No apology for lack of greeting. Just text. Hale read it once. Then again, slower. Reese shifted weight from one foot to the other, the way men do when they are trying not to ask a question they will regret hearing answered. "Well?" he said at last. Hale did not respond immediately. He laid the paper flat, as if it might behave differently under discipline. "It claims," Hale said, "to be written by a man buried last winter." Reese blinked. "That's too possible." Hale's expression remained politely neutral. "A useful observation. We shall keep it on file." Reese leaned slightly forward despite himself. "Is it a joke, sir? Jokes usually aspire to be funny," Hale said. "This does not." The letter was short enough to remember without effort, though Hale did not quote it aloud at first. He was still deciding how seriously language should be taken when it had already detached itself from common sense. Outside, a cart passed somewhere on the lane. The sound was faint, indifferent. Reese finally asked, quieter, "Who's it from, then?" Hale tapped the paper once with a finger. "If it is to be believed, it is from Thomas Wren." That name changed the air in the room. Not dramatically, but distinctly, like a door closing somewhere else in the building. Reese knew it. Everyone in the village knew it. Wren had been buried in January. A fall, the doctor had said. Ice on the bridge, the vicar had said. A tragic but tidy explanation, as villages prefer their tragedies. The matter had closed itself without resistance. There had been no scandal, no second version, no appetite for disturbance. And yet here was his name, inked into the present tense. Hale folded the letter once, then again. "Informally speaking," Reese said, struggling for shape, "people don't usually write letters after burial." "Informally speaking," Hale replied, "people also do not fall into place as neatly as they are buried." That silenced Reese more effectively than authority ever could. Hale stood and went to the window. The village outside was performing its usual choreography. A woman shaking a mat that had no dust in it, a boy arguing with a bicycle, a dog refusing to acknowledge responsibility for anything. Normality, carefully maintained. He returned to the desk. "We will need to speak to those who attended the burial," he said. Reese frowned. "That was half the village. Then we shall begin with the half that remembers it differently." Reese hesitated. "Anne, D the letter, sir? What do we do about that?" Hale glanced at it again, as if expecting it to correct itself under scrutiny. "We treat it," he said mildly, "as something that should not exist and therefore requires explanation." Reese nodded, though not with comfort. "And if it doesn't have one?" Hale picked up his coat. "Then," he said, "we will have to listen more carefully to the people who insist everything is already explained." The lane to the Wren household had changed since winter, though not in ways that would be easily described. Hedgerows had regained their confidence. Gates no longer creaked with grief. Even the air seemed to have stopped rehearsing absence. Mrs. Wren answered the door after a delay that suggested she had considered not answering at all. When she saw Hale, her face performed a careful rearrangement of politeness over something less stable. "Inspector," she said, "this is unexpected." "Not entirely," Hale replied, "but I can see why you would prefer it to be. That earned a faint, involuntary breath from her, almost a laugh, if laughter had been discouraged more thoroughly. Inside, the house smelled of polish and restraint. Tea was offered. It was accepted. Neither party pretended enthusiasm. Only when cups were placed down did Hale speak. "I have received a letter," he said. Mrs. Wren's fingers paused on the saucer. Just briefly, just enough. "I see," she said. "I believe it purports to be from your late husband." A silence followed, not dramatic, but carefully assembled. Then Mrs. Wren said, very evenly, "That is impossible." Hale nodded once. "That was also my initial conclusion." She looked at him directly now. "And yet you are here." "I am here," he agreed, "because impossible things occasionally insist on being investigated." Her gaze shifted slightly away, as though something in the room had become difficult to place. "He is dead," she said, not as a claim but as a requirement. Hale did not contradict her. He only said, "Then someone." Nee has borrowed his voice. And in the small pause that followed, neither of them said what they were both thinking, that voices, once borrowed, have a habit of returning with interest. The inspector did not press Mrs. Wren for a reaction that would satisfy curiosity, because curiosity was rarely useful in rooms like hers. He simply allowed the silence to settle in the way dust settles after furniture has been moved recently enough for memory to notice difference. Mrs. Wren finally spoke again, her voice carefully level, as though uneven tone might cause something structural to fail in the house. "You will forgive me if I find this unnecessary," she said. Hale inclined his head slightly, not in agreement nor in disagreement, but in acknowledgement that unnecessary things often arrive with the same persistence as necessary ones. "I assume you have shown this to no one," she added. "No," he said, "because I prefer not to multiply confusion before understanding it. That is a polite way of say, Yangi do not trust people in this village," Mrs. Wren observed. Hale allowed the observation to sit without correction. Outside the window, a cartwheel passed over gravel with the slow insistence of routine life. "I am told your husband was buried in January," he said instead. Her hands tightened slightly on the cup, but her posture remained composed. "Yes," she said. Frost made the ground harder than expected, and yet he was still lowered into it. Hale noted gently. Mrs. Wren looked at him then, as if deciding whether he was careless or precise enough to be dangerous. "He was lowered into it," she repeated slowly, as though testing the sentence for cracks. Reese, who had been standing near the door, shifted his weight again, a habit that suggested discomfort with words that behaved too well. Mrs. Wren set her cup down with a small controlled sound. "If you are suggesting something, Inspector," she said, "I would prefer you say it plainly." "Plainness is often mistaken for kindness," Hale replied, "but I will try to avoid both mistakes." Mrs. Wren did not smile, but something in her expression shifted, as though she had heard an old argument returned in a new coat. He continued, "I have a letter which claims to originate from your late husband, and I am required by circumstance, if not by procedure, to determine whether that claim is meaningful." Mrs. Wren exhaled slowly. "Meaning," she said, "is a generous word for what you are doing." Hale considered this. "I have been accused of generosity less often than I might deserve." Reese made a sound that might have been agreement or restraint. Mrs. Wren stood then, walked a few steps toward the window, not turning her back fully but allowing distance to enter the conversation. "You will find that villagers remember what they prefer," she said, "and forget what they need to." "And what do they prefer?" Hale asked. She paused. The rain outside finally decided to begin falling in earnest. "That thing's ended cleanly," she said. ID. No loose threads, no unanswered questions, no one returning in ink. "That is a convenient preference," Hale observed. "It is a necessary one," she replied, "for those who remain behind." Silence widened again, not hostile but heavy, like fabric pulled too tightly over furniture that does not quite fit. Reese cleared his throat quietly. "Sir, if the letter is genuine, then someone is either lying or mistaken about a burial." "Or both," Hale said gently. Mrs. Wren turned slightly back toward them. "My husband had no enemies," she said with the precision of someone correcting a record. "Everyone has enemies," Reese muttered before he could stop himself. Mrs. Wren looked at him as if he had spoken aloud a minor insult to architecture. Hale intervened softly, reminding Reese with a glance that villages were not interrogation rooms, unless one insisted they were. Mrs. Wren returned to her seat as though the conversation had taken something from her energy rather than her certainty. "I will saw. Why this?" she added more quietly than before. If someone is writing as Thomas, then they know enough to be dangerous or familiar with those who were. She stopped. Reese leaned forward slightly. What do you mean, ma'am? Mrs. Wren shook her head once, a gesture of refusal to elaborate rather than inability. Hale noted it without comment. He had seen enough pauses in his career to know that some were not empty but carefully filled with unsaid instruction. He rose then slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Wren, he said, for your time and for your clarity, however unintended it may have been. She did not rise to accompany them to the door, which was either discourtesy or exhaustion or both. Outside, the rain had committed fully now, turning the lane into a surface that reflected more than it revealed. Reese exhaled once they were clear of the house. Sir, I don't like this. Dislike is not evidence, Reese. Then what is, sir? Reese asked. Hale looked back at the house, where curtains had already been, and drawn again into their usual discipline. Evidence, he said, is what remains when everyone agrees something has already ended. He began walking down the lane slowly, as though allowing the village itself to reassemble around the question they had just left behind. Reese followed a half-step behind, as was his habit when thinking did not come easily and questions came too quickly. You think someone is lying about Wren being dead? He asked. Hale did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched a woman in the distance hanging laundry, as if nothing in the world had changed at all. Not yet, he said at last, but someone is certainly insisting that he is still present, and that is always more interesting than simple fraud. Reese frowned slightly. So we are looking for a man who writes like a dead one? Hale nodded faintly. Not a man necessarily, but a habit of being remembered incorrectly, and that habit leaves traces in ink. The vicarage stood at the edge of the village where the road began to forget its own purpose and turned uncertain between hedges that had learned to lean inward. Inspector Hale arrived without announcing himself, which suited the building better than ceremony ever would. Reese followed at a respectful distance, as though the air itself required permission. Inside, the smell was not of incense or devotion, but of paper kept too long in drawers that were never fully closed. The vicar, Reverend Ellery, greeted them with a politeness that suggested interruption was already accounted for in his day. I wondered when you might come, he said. Hale removed his glove slowly. That implies expectation. It implies experience, the vicar replied. They were shown into a room where lights seemed to have been assigned carefully to avoid emphasis. Chairs were offered. Tea was not immediately mentioned, which in village terms was its own kind of statement. Hale did not sit at once. He observed instead the arrangement of books on a table that had been a Jew, stead recently, though not convincingly. You attended the burial of Thomas Wren, Hale said. The vicar folded his hands. I conducted it. Reese glanced at Hale, then at the floor, as though the floor might confirm or deny memory. And you signed the register, Hale continued. Yes, the vicar said simply. Hale nodded once, as if collecting something invisible. Then you will not be surprised that correspondence has emerged under his name. A pause followed, measured and careful. I have heard rumors, the vicar said at last. Rumors tend to arrive earlier than facts in places like this, Hale replied. The vicar did not dispute it. He sat then, finally allowing himself a posture that suggested endurance rather than welcome. Inspector, he said gently, what exactly are you suggesting? That someone who was buried is now writing letters, Reese said before Hale could answer. The vicar turned his attention to Reese with mild curiosity, as if considering whether innocence was a temporary condition or a permanent one. That would be troubling, he said. It would be impossible, Reese added. The vicar allowed a small silence to pass between them before speaking again. Impossibility is often a matter of agreement, he said. Hale finally sat. Agreement requires participants. The vicar's expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened slightly, like attention narrowing through habit. Thomas Wren was known here, the vicar said. A quiet man, not easily defined, which is usually how villages prefer their dead. Easily defined dead are easier to bury, Hale observed. The vicar did not smile, though the observation seemed to land correctly. Outside, a bell sounded once, not for service but for marking time that had no particular significance. Hale continued. Tell me about the burial itself. The vicar hesitated only briefly. It was cold, the ground resisted. There were fewer people than expected, though more than necessary. Necessary for what? Reese asked. Ked. The vicar looked at him. For remembering properly. Hale leaned slightly forward. And did you remember properly, Reverend? A pause. Longer this time. I remembered what I was told, the vicar said carefully. That is not quite the same thing, Hale replied. No, the vicar agreed. It is not. Reese shifted. Sir, are you saying the burial might not have been complete? The vicar interjected softly. The burial was conducted with dignity. Hale nodded. Dignity is not under question. Something in that phrasing made the vicar's hands tighten briefly together. I do not understand, the vicar admitted. That, Hale said, is precisely why I am here. A silence settled again, this one more deliberate, as though the room itself had begun listening. The vicar stood and walked to the window, not looking out so much as aligning himself with it. Inspector, he said, villages do not survive on uncertainty. They survive on agreement, Hale corrected, even when the agreement is fragile. I'll. The vicar turned slightly. And what is it you think we have agreed upon incorrectly? Hale did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the faint movement of wind through hedges outside, as if considering whether truth in this place preferred to travel visibly or not at all. That Thomas Wren is no longer present, he said finally. The vicar closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. That is what happened, he said. Or what was said to have happened, Hale replied. Reese spoke quietly. Reverend, did you see the body? The question changed the air. The vicar did not respond at once. When he did, his voice was less certain. I saw what was presented for burial, he said. Hale rose slowly. And you accepted it, he said. The vicar looked at him then, fully now, as though weighing whether acceptance was ever truly voluntary. In this village, the vicar said, we accept many things in order to continue. Hale picked up his gloves again, then continuation, he said mildly. Ma, why not be as stable as it appears? They left without ceremony. The door closed behind them with the careful sound of something maintaining order rather than ending conversation. Outside, Reese exhaled as though he had been holding breath for longer than he realized. Sir, he said. He didn't say it was false. No, Hale replied, walking back down the path. He said it was agreed. And that matters. In villages, Hale said, agreement often matters more than truth, until something returns that refuses to remain agreed upon. Reese looked back at the vicarage once, as though expecting it to correct itself, but nothing moved except the wind through the hedges along the lane in silence. The lane away from the vicarage carried less certainty than it had before, as though conversation had altered its gradient. Inspector Hale walked without hurry, while Reese followed with the uneasy rhythm of someone trying to match pace with thoughts that did not belong to him. You noticed it too, Reese said at last. Hale did not look at him. Noticed what, precisely? That he didn't deny anything properly. Hale allowed a faint pause. Denial is often confused with denial of responsibility rather than denial of fact. Reese frowned. That sounds the same. It is not, Hale replied gently. They reached the village road where the cemetery gates stood a little too tall for their own purpose. Ironwork darkened by weather that had stopped trying to distinguish seasons. A small sign read simply, St. Alden's Burial Ground. Hale stopped before entering. We will need the burial register, he said. Reese nodded. The church keeps it. Yes, Hale said, and so does the ground, in its own way. Reese glanced at him. Sir. Hale stepped through the gate. Inside, the cemetery was orderly in the manner of things that had been corrected too many times to admit disorder. Rows of stones stood with restrained pride. Names repeated patterns of grief that had long since become administrative. They did not. Ought go directly to the caretaker's shed. Hale paused instead near the section where fresh soil still carried the uneven texture of recent disturbance. Reese noticed it first. That's Wren's grave. Hale crouched slightly, not touching, only observing. The earth was not perfectly settled. It had the hesitant quality of something that had been disturbed more than once. Graves settle, Hale said, but not in disagreements. Reese swallowed. You think someone opened it? I think, Hale replied. Someone ensured we would not stop asking that question. A voice came from behind them, roughened by habit and weather. You're not supposed to be here staring at it like that. The gravedigger stood a few paces away, shovel resting against his shoulder like an old accusation. His name, according to Reese's earlier notes, was Martin. Hale rose slowly. We are not here to stare, he said. We are here to understand. Martin spat to one side. Nothing to understand. Ground was hard. People die. That is it. Reese stepped forward. We just need to confirm something about the burial. Martin's eyes narrowed. Everything was confirmed at the time. Hale tilted his head slightly. By whom? Martin hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. By everyone who needed to be, he said. The phrase hung awkwardly in the cold air. Hale looked back at the grave. Tell me, he said calmly. Did you notice anything unusual during the lowering of the coffin? Martin shifted his grip on the shovel. Cold day, he said. Ground broke uneven, that's all. And the coffin, Hale continued, was sealed. Yes. Reese spoke quietly. Was it heavy? Martin gave him a look of irritation. They're always heavy. Hale straightened fully now. Not always, he said. The digger's expression tightened slightly. A silence followed, during which the cemetery seemed to assert its preference for not participating in conversation. Hale finally said, We will need to see the register. Martin exhaled through his nose. In the shed, they followed him without further exchange. Inside the shed, papers were stacked in uneven order that suggested responsibility without affection. Martin pulled out a ledger and placed it on the table. Hale opened it carefully. Names, dates, confirmations of endings. Then he stopped. Reese leaned in slightly. What is it, sir? Hale did not answer immediately. Instead, he traced a line with his finger. Reese read aloud slowly. Thomas Wren, January, burial confirmed. Yes, Hale said softly. Martin crossed his arms. There you go. Hale turned the page back one, then forward again. There is no signature, he said. Martin frowned. Of course there is. Vicar signed it. Hale looked up. This is not the vicar's hand. Reese blinked. Then whose? Hale cut him off gently. That is not the point yet. He closed the ledger. The sound was soft, but final. Outside, wind moved across the cemetery with the patience of something that had witnessed too many agreements. Hale stepped over. Until first, Reese followed, unsettled. So someone forged it? Reese asked. Possibly, Hale said. And buried him anyway. Possibly. Reese hesitated. Or, he wasn't there at all. Hale stopped walking. For a moment, he did not answer. Then he said, That is the question that would cause the most inconvenience in this village. They stood between rows of stones that did not respond, did not correct, did not deny, only recorded. And somewhere beneath that recording, something about the ground did not feel settled at all. Reese glanced back toward the grave rows, as if expecting one of them to shift under attention. Sir, he said, if the signature is wrong, does that mean the burial record is false? Hale resumed walking. It means, he said, that someone has been careful enough to be believed. Reese frowned. That doesn't help. It was not intended to. The gate came back into view, darker now under the thickening rain. Hale paused before it. Reese, he said, people do not usually forgive death records for amusement. Reese swallowed. Then why would they? Hale opened the gate slowly. Because, he said, something in this village required Thomas Wren to remain exactly where everyone agreed he should be. They stepped out into the rain together, leaving the cemetery behind them without sound.